There are two answers to this fundamental question: what am I? What is it to be human? What is it to become an apprentice of Jesus? It means increasingly taking on the way he lived as a human in this earth, in this body. Increasingly exemplifying what it is truly to be human. Now we're right back to, well, what is that?
A very warm welcome and Happy New Year from those of us from the Lausanne Movement podcast. We trust and pray that 2025 will be a year where we will all continue to be inspired and challenged to accelerate global mission together. My name is Jason Watson, and today on the podcast, we have the wonderful opportunity to hear from Dr. Stan Wallace, a catalyst from the Academic Ministry and Educators Issue Network. During our time together, Stan brings together neuroscience, the theology of the human person, mission, and what it means to flourish in the world that we live in today. Now, this interview was recorded last year just before the 4th Lausanne Congress and offers us a lot to think about as we head into the start of the new year. So I want to invite you to grab your headphones and let's dive into today's interview with Dr. Stan Wallace. Well, Dr. Stan Wallace, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. Good to be here.
It's great to have you with us. You got a fascinating role leading an organization called Global Scholars, and you're also about to release a book that tackles some really deep questions about neuroscience and theology and human flourishing. So could you begin by just giving us a quick snapshot of your journey? What brought you to this intersection of faith and neuroscience and theology?
Right. So I did student ministry for my first 7 years of vocational ministry. And then the last, 30 or so, I've been in faculty ministry. And all through the years, a recurring question that underlies so many other questions that non-believers and believers ask is, so what am I? Because they realize that understanding what I am as a person is going to answer a lot of questions about, well, then how do I live well? How do I flourish? So I just got interested in the question long ago, tried to do some reading, had the privilege of studying under a Christian scholar who has maybe more than, 99% of the people in the world thought about this issue. His name is Dr. J.P. Moreland. Took my master's and doctorate under him, focusing on these type of issues. And so have done some teaching and now writing on it for a number of years. And by the way, the book just did come out, so it's available now.
Okay, yes. Cool. Well, we're going to talk a little bit more about that later on. So I know that J.P. Moreland and yourself have been influenced by thinkers like Dallas Willard and C.S. Lewis. And I'd be curious, how have these voices shaped your own theological paradigms of faith and human flourishing?
In deep, deep ways. So at a very basic, very broad level, there are two answers to this fundamental question: what am I? What is it to be human? One answer is I'm a physical being. I'm purely matter. It's called physicalism. And the other answer is, in some way, I'm a combination of a material and an immaterial dimension, a body and a soul. It's called dualism. And what JP and Dallas and Lewis and Aquinas and others have helped me see is there are actually two different ways to understand this duality. And the common way that people tend to think about it comes from the Enlightenment through a philosopher named Rene Descartes, which saw the soul kind of stuck in the body, kind of a real unnatural place to be. And so spiritual growth and everything else about flourishing is somehow getting released from this physical stuff, this body, the world, all the things that are mundane, quote unquote, which comes from the Latin word mundi, which is earth. So getting released from this physical realm is really where the action is. And I realized through these folks that no, actually, scripture and philosophy and what we find from neuroscience, all three agree that no, this union of body and soul is good, it's natural, it's deep, and the more we lean into that reality that we are a functional unity, the more we'll flourish, the better we'll minister to others as also embodied souls that have this deep functional unity. And it makes so much sense, but it's tended to be the view not as popular in Protestant circles because it draws heavily on Thomas Aquinas, all the way back through to Aristotle, ultimately. And we tended to throw a lot of those medieval thinkers out with the Reformation because we didn't agree with their views of salvation. So kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. And I've been on a journey to rediscover some of these thoughts that really make a lot of sense. And as I said, some Protestants are very engaged in this, including Dallas and JP and others.
And we're going to dive into, as we go into this interview, we're going to dive into what this means for missions and ministry. One of the very prominent themes that run through what you're talking about is the question of what does it mean to be human? As you put it, what am I, or who am I? And the State of the Great Commission report that the Lausanne movement published earlier this year claims that one of the most important questions facing the global church right now
That's right.
is this question of what does it mean to be human? So I'd be curious, could you share some of your own reflections on the report's findings? What stood out to you?
Well, I was very encouraged that, first of all, it was identified as a central issue and framed in that way, because that was a very insightful way to say, okay, here are issues that we need to be thinking about. Here are the implications. I thought I did a really good job of drawing out a few of the implications, some of the very important implications, whether it's with AI or human sexuality or whatnot, because all of these things follow directly from how you answer that first fundamental question of what am I?
Yeah. So what are some of the popular level understandings of what am I, or what does it mean to be human? Both within, like, as we talk about society, but also within the church. So you mentioned one or two, but could you unpack that a little bit more for us?
Since the Enlightenment, which is a period of intellectual history that we've been living in now for several centuries, there's been this idea that if I can't see it, it isn't real. So with that comes the view that, we must be only that which we can see, this physical body. And so all answers to questions about human flourishing and growth in any way comes down to how do we physically nurture this body. And, scripture, of course, is clear. And I think clearly from philosophy, we have good reason to think that no, we're something deeper. And in fact, we in scripture see four things true of us that all four answer the question, what are we? First, yes, we are a body, and a body that is valuable. It's part of God's good creation. It's the only part of creation where God said after the creation day, it is very good. And so we cannot count the obviously reality, but also the importance and the value of the physical reality we live in. But secondly, scripture is clear. We're a soul, that we have an immaterial dimension, that we're not just a body. And thirdly, scripture is clear that those two realities are deeply united. So much so that some read the, especially Old Testament, and have this sense of, well, maybe we are a unity. We're a composite. But as scripture continues to unfold, we have revelation giving us more and more clarity. As you get later into the Old Testament and certainly the New Testament, you get this sense of, no, the soul can live without the body. I mean, Jesus says to the thief on the cross, today you will be with me in paradise. Now, your body won't, of course, but you will. So you must not be the same thing as your body. And so the fourth point is that, yes, though we're a body and a soul that are deeply united, we're ultimately a soul that has a body. And that is supported by the work that I've done in philosophy. For instance, it comes through the Thomistic line, Thomas Aquinas, through Dallas Willard and others. And I think it's what we're finding in neuroscience too, that we have this deep unity between the two, but ultimately we are this person that transcends our body, that was in the body that we had when we were one, is in the body we are now in, and is the body we will have at 85, and then in the final resurrection, the same body, the same soul that has the body that changes all through the years. So what are the thing that stands under, that substance that stands under the body and unifies all of the properties and dispositions and other traits of the body? So I got into a little philosophy there, but there's a lot there to be said.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. There's so much more to be said on this topic, but I think one of the questions, and I'm sure many of those who are listening to this podcast are asking, is why is this important? Why are we even talking about the body and what does it mean to be human and the connection to the soul? Why are we talking about that on a missions podcast? So let me ask you, why do you believe it's essential for us to pursue a correct understanding of this? And what are the dangers of getting it wrong? And I guess suppose on the other hand, what are the benefits of getting it right?
In terms of loving God, it helps us think well about the role of the body in our formation. This is where Dallas Willard spent a lot of his time talking about the spiritual disciplines and why those type of things we do in our bodies, like fasting, have an impact on our soul. Well, it's because there's this deep causal connection between the two. And so we can affect our spiritual formation through bodily practices. It also makes sense of the challenges we face and how we can overcome them in our walks with God. So the soul has various capacities or faculties. So we've got mental capacities that allow us to think and reason and decide, and volitional capacities actually help us decide. Emotional capacities help us feel well, have the right emotions, and so on and so forth. And they affect one another. So, wrong beliefs lead to emotional challenges, perhaps. Choosing the wrong group of friends through our social capacity lead to poor choices often. So there's these deep connections between these different faculties of our soul. And understanding that well helps us understand how things can go better. In other words, how we can be formed properly into the image of Christ. And when things are going sideways, help us and help professionals in these fields, counselors, pastors, physicians, everybody who deals with aspects of the soul or soul body relation, to diagnose, okay, what's going on here and how can this be addressed? How can we help this person? So I veered a little bit into ministry and serving others, but that's one way that understanding this really helps us. It also helps us make sense of the notion of spiritual maturity. Matthew 5:48, Jesus says, "Be perfect as I am perfect." And we look at that and say, well, that's impossible. How can I be perfect? But the word perfect really comes from a noun, which means the end or the result, telos. He's really saying, just reach your end in the natural state of full maturity in light of your nature, which is what human persons naturally move toward. And Jesus, as having taken on our human nature, himself moved toward and actually finally realized or finally fully expressed those properties of soul. So it just makes sense of, okay, here's what flourishing is. It's moving toward our end. It's moving toward our telos, the natural state of maturity we in our very nature were created to have. And it includes our embodiedness, includes the flourishing of our bodies, which then also makes sense of the final resurrection, when that will come to fruition and we will truly be all God has created us to be. So it just makes a lot of sense of all those issues in spiritual formation. I just am touching the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot more that can be said.
Yeah, so I mean, I'd be curious to hear from you. What you're touching on here is really the great commandment. When Jesus was asked, what is the greatest commandment, he said, it's to love God, love others, and he also mentioned this element of loving self. So, in your opinion, how does understanding how God has created us lead us to loving ourselves more fully?
Absolutely. So you've got to understand what you are as a self before you can love that, because love has an object. And if you have a wrong conception or understanding of you as a self, you won't at least fully love yourself as you should. This is one of the issues that I address in the book, namely a group of Christians who are concluding that due to the findings of neuroscience, we have to define the person as, if not primarily, maybe even most fundamentally, a body. And so they're trying to do theology and spiritual formation from a physicalist perspective, a Christian physicalist perspective. Here in the U.S., there's a Christian philosopher at Fuller Seminary. Her name is Nancy Murphy, and she says we have no need of the soul or any spiritual reality to make sense of what we are. And there's a whole generation of Christian counselors and pastors who've been influenced by this line of thinking. They call themselves neurotheologians, and I'm engaging a number of them in the book, specifically two, a gentleman named Jim Wilder, who wrote a book, Renovated, and another gentleman, Kurt Thompson, who wrote Anatomy of the Soul. And they have fabulous pastoral advice. They're really dear brothers in the Lord, but they're trying to make sense of our embodiedness in a way that reduces us in a pretty drastic way to brain functions. So as a result, the understanding of flourishing is significantly emaciated. My hope is to try to regain a fuller understanding of what is the self, so we can truly understand, okay, we have these 6 faculties of the soul, one of them being the sensory faculty that relates to our bodies. And by understanding what they are and how they relate to one another and how we can leverage that in our growth, we'll truly love God as we desire in deeper and deeper ways. And again, I'm not saying anything new here. This is what Dallas Willard wrote so many books about and so well articulated. I'm just trying to say it in a little bit of a different way for an audience who wants a little primer on Dallas and others. I'm trying to summarize some of those things.
Well, I'll be the first to say that I am a fan of Dallas Willard and his writings, and so it's always great to talk about him and hear more insights that kind of continue his work and his legacy. So, let's talk about ministry here, because many of those who are listening to
Yeah.
this podcast, they're listening to this because they are actively involved in missions and have a passion to see God's mission advanced globally. And so we've kind of unpacked this in a little bit more detail. But could you share with me, like what are the practical implications that you're talking about here when we're talking about ministry? So I can love myself more, I can love others a little bit better, but practically, how do you see this playing out?
Yeah, I identify 3 main areas: helping us understand evangelism, discipleship, and missions, helping us understand how to engage social issues in our cultures, and then helping us love better others in our work and what we do professionally. So let me touch on all 3 of those. In terms of evangelism and missions, especially, there's an idea that Leslie Newbigin made famous called a plausibility structure. And it's the idea that a culture will develop a certain set of things they think are certainly true, but others they think they're maybe true. They're plausible. Maybe I don't buy it, but it's at least possible it is true. So, for instance, if I say to you that that the Earth is flat, which of course I don't believe, but let's just say I do, and you're gonna right away think, well, that's not even possibly true. In other words, that's not even in your plausibility structure. It's not just that you don't happen to think it's false. It can't be true. We just know too much. One of the great challenges in missions is that increasingly, not only in Western context, but now more broadly, globally, there is a plausibility structure in cultures that excludes the supernatural, that excludes the spiritual realm, that says, following the Enlightenment, which has had a phenomenal impact on cultural formation around the world, it says, again, if I can't in some way experience it through my 5 senses, it isn't real. And so when you go to share the gospel with somebody and start talking about these immaterial things like God, souls, moral values, they say, well, that's like a flat earth. What are you talking about? Nobody believes that anymore. We've explained everything through science and through the physical realm. And so for us to capitulate on the reality or nature of the soul and not be able to defend it as a spiritual substance, as something that exists in its own right, as a spiritual thing, not something that is in any way dependent for its existence on the body. And there's a lot packed into there. I have a whole chapter on what that means. But the point is that it continues to reinforce this cultural narrative in so many places that if I can't see it, it isn't real. And so it's harder and harder for people to make sense of the gospel as plausible if there isn't a spiritual realm, if there's not a soul, if we can't know things that aren't empirically verifiable. So it's got huge implications there. On the other hand, if we can make the case and have people have this understanding of us as a substantial soul that has a body and is deeply wed to the body, it makes sense of everything we do in missions, from caring to the soul and salvation of the soul to caring for the physical needs of persons, because that's a very real component of who they are. And those needs need to be met as well. So it makes sense of everything we do in missions. And it's important that we have that sense.
Well, let's pause there for a moment and just unpack that a little bit further, if you're okay with that. I think what you're saying is definitely true in a Western context for those who do doubt the spiritual. I live in Africa, and many in Africa don't doubt that there's a spiritual reality. But let's just say, for instance, we're doing this in Europe. You're encountering someone who does not believe in the spiritual. For them, it's not plausible. It doesn't fit into the plausibility structure. How would you go about taking them from a place of it not being plausible to identifying and helping them come to a place of recognize, okay, perhaps this is plausible, that there is a spiritual realm?
Right.
What would you say to that?
Very good. So, by the way, I work a lot through global scholars in the African context, and increasingly, I work in higher education among those in university, and increasingly this naturalism or physicalism is making inroads in Africa as well. So I want to flag that the tidal wave of the Enlightenment, I think, continues to flood the whole earth. We do need to be vigilant. But having said that, you're right. It's much more prevalent in, say, Europe. When I was doing faculty ministry in a major research university here in the U.S., and I was sitting down with a math professor who was not a believer. And as I was trying to share the gospel with him and engage in spiritual conversations, he just finally stopped me and said, look, I've got a PhD in mathematics. I'm teaching here at this leading university. I'm just beyond that. I mean, that's what people believe before they really think these things through and get an education. So, it just doesn't really make any sense, and I'm not really that interested. So I realized, yeah, it's not something that I'm going to be able to start the conversation assuming that we have some common ground, that there is a physical, immaterial realm. So I shifted the conversation to, I'm going to use this as one example. There's 100 examples, but I shifted the conversation to his field. He was a mathematician, so I asked what he studies. He says, I study mathematical objects and their relations, which I think is actually a really good answer. I said, oh, that's so interesting. Yeah, I've always wondered about that. Do you have one in your drawer? Could I touch one of those things? I want to feel what their texture is. Like two. Do you keep two around somewhere? He looked at me like I was an idiot. Like, what are you talking about? He said, well, they're on the board. I said, oh, you keep them up there. So you got to make sure they don't get erased overnight, or you're gonna have to go get a PhD in something else, right? I said, well, no, they're written all over the world. I said, but in theory, they could be erased everywhere, and you'd have nothing to study. He thought about that for a while, and he said, no. I guess I do. I study something that's not physical. I study these things that wouldn't have to be written down to be true. I said, exactly. So if you have already a belief in all of these things that aren't material, all these things you study, these mathematical objects and their relations, what's the problem with adding God and souls to that realm of things that at least might exist? And he said, you're right. I need to rethink this. And it led to a very fruitful conversation. So that's one example of, I think I know a lot of people who are secularists already implicitly believe in the immaterial realm. You just have to figure out where they do. Others keep pictures of their kids when they were 3 and 4. Now maybe they're 23 and 24. So you got to ask, well, what makes them the same? Because all the matter that was there in that picture when your son was 2 is not there anymore. So in what sense is that still him? Well, it's because there's a substantial soul that underlies the changes of the body, but that's not what he is assuming. And so just asking these kind of questions. You can ask questions about rationality and freedom, which can't be explained by purely brain states, which are determined by the laws of chemistry and physics. But free choices by definition, and even rationality, aren't the kind of things that can be determined by laws. So you start to just ask questions along these lines. And as I said, I've got a couple chapters that outlines some of these type of questions. But I find that when I start asking questions, and I think that is an important way to go in these conversations, but as I ask questions and challenge these assumptions, or ask people to defend their assumptions, that we're all physical things while they still believe in a lot of immaterial things, then we can have good conversations.
Well, that's brilliant. I mean, that's number one. We're talking about evangelism. The next one was
Yeah.
discipleship. Let's dive in there. Why don't you unpack that for us?
Well, again, that's just back to spiritual formation. What is it to become an apprentice of Jesus, to be a disciple? Well, it's to walk as he walked. Well, to walk as he walked and live as he lived means increasingly taking on the way he lived as a human in this earth, in this body, increasingly exemplifying what it is truly to be human. Now we're right back to, well, what is that? So the better we understand what we are to be human, we understand what he took on, Philippians 2, right? He took on the very nature of a servant.
And the third,
Absolutely. Second and third. So the second element, after making sense of evangelism, discipleship, and missions, it helps us understand how to engage social issues in our cultures, issues in biomedical ethics, say abortion and euthanasia, human cloning, all of these issues. They all start from assumptions of what it is to be human and when human life begins or ends. And so the clearer we are on when life does begin and end, the better we're able to rationally engage in this conversation in our culture and support what is true. And then the other area this comes into play significantly is as our culture talks about issues of justice for all, and here in the US, it's part of our Constitution, as in many countries, what does that mean and why is that something we should strive for? Well, that notion is based on assumption that we are all fundamentally the same, that we all most fundamentally, apart from any other difference that people might exhibit, ultimately we share a human nature, which is where the image of God resides. And so because we share that fundamental nature that's not physical, because all those other variations can be physical in some way or another, but because we share this human nature, we can truly ground a notion of justice for all. When you lose that and people are reflective and say, yeah, there is no shared nature, you move pretty quickly into very, very, very disturbing approaches to social and cultural engineering. And the classic and unfortunately greatest example is the Holocaust, where groups of people were defined as non-human based on certain observable traits or ethnicity, and as a result were treated in the horrendous ways that we know of. So to make sense of truly defending all persons as equal and valuable and to be protected by law really needs to have a robust understanding of the person as more than physical, as essentially human nature that is shared by all and equally valuable.
Stan, thank you. Thank you for already beginning to chat into the social issues and how this connects into that. Already spoken about a bit of like the justice element, but I'd be curious. The State of the Great Commission report does highlight two important elements of how this question plays out and the implications of it. The one has to do with AI, and our interaction with AI. How does your understanding of humans and our body, soul inform our conversation around AI? What would you say about that?
Right. And there's a lot to be said. And I just scratched the surface, and there's some people doing really good work on this. A scholar named Sherman at Calvin College, Calvin University, I'm thinking of here in the US, but Derek Sherman. But essentially, the fundamental question is, do we differ from a computer in degree or in kind? In other words, are we just complex computers that are very sophisticated? So we differ, but we only differ in degree. And therefore, at some point, the processing of a computer will get to a point where it will equal or supersede us. So because the difference is only one of degree, that's a variable that will change with the speed of technology. If we're different in kind, then the mental life is fundamentally different in its very nature from that of a computer. And a computer will never think. It will never reason. It will never have consciousness. And there's good reason to believe that the difference between our minds and a computer is one of the difference of kind, not degree. And I make that case. But if so, then a lot of our worries are allayed. And we can then really, I think, embrace technology and utilize it to proper ends. And that's always a question we've got to ask also, or the ends toward which is being used. But in terms of the ontological question of, well, what are computers, and can computers or other elements of AI become human or have equal rights, and so on and so forth, really is answered when you answer what is the nature of the brain, what's the nature of the mind, what's the difference, quantitative purely or qualitative, from that of a computer or a piece of technology.
Right. And another really important topic that came up in the State of the Great Commission report has to do with gender and sexuality. So if you're comfortable discussing it, how
Yeah,
does
sure.
holistic dualism inform our understandings of questions related to gender and sexuality?
And I'm glad you did throw that term out. I don't know if I used that earlier. Within the dualist camp, that we're a body and soul, there's the view that I'm advancing. It's holistic dualism, as opposed to Cartesian dualism, the other view where the body's kind of trapped, the soul's kind of trapped in the body. So glad you used that term. Yeah, so first of all, back to my earlier point, each and every person, regardless of any variation, ethnicity, sexual orientation, whatever, is equally valuable in the sight of God, and intrinsically valuable because of the reality of them being a human soul that bears God's image. So that's the first thing that this helps us say, is we treat all people with equal respect, equally valuable, equally important. And that, I think, helps us love our neighbors as ourselves in this case, even though we might very, very strongly disagree with their ethic. So that's the first thing that needs to be said. Secondly, with the three views I have on the table, physicalism, Cartesian dualism, and holistic dualism, only one of them is the grounding for the current popular views of human sexuality. So let me unpack this quickly. If you're a physicalist, you're just whatever your body is. So there's no confusion, no doubt, no, I'm this, but my body's this. That doesn't exist, because you are your body. There is nothing to be at odds there, right? It's only if you're a Cartesian dualist. Now, this is the view that my body and soul are very loosely united. I'm kind of like, as some have said, a ghost in the machine. The body's kind of a machine that does its thing, and then I'm sort of stuck in it. And I'm this spirit that is uncomfortable actually in this physical realm and wants to be liberated from this realm. Well, that's the Cartesian view of soul and body. By the way, back to the AI conversation, it's that view, although I don't think proponents always understand that's what they're assuming, but that view where you really need to be liberated from the body, and through transhumanism can fully flourish. Okay, so those issues assume this Cartesian dualism as well. But in terms of the transgender conversation, on that view, you could be trapped in a body because there's such a loose connection between a soul and a body. A soul can be one thing and a body can be another thing. On the holistic dualist view, the soul actually creates the body to live in the world and interact and flourish in the world. I got a whole chapter on this. There's a lot more to be said, but it is actually the soul that forms the DNA structure to form the physical body, so that the soul, can hear and smell and taste and see and feel, and so on and so forth. So those, in this view, are actually properties of the mind, not the brain. The brain doesn't see or think or feel or whatever, but it uses the sense organs to do so. Okay, that's the holistic dualism that runs back through Aquinas, ultimately grounded in Aristotle in some very fundamental ways. If that's the case, you can't be trapped in a different body, because your body is simply an expression of your soul. So what your body is what your soul is. And so flourishing, this is the pastoral point. So flourishing is living according to your nature. It's living according to what you fundamentally are. And this is what all views would say, but in this view, it makes sense, this holistic dualism sense, because we know what we are, both by introspective awareness in our soul, but also by the expression of our soul in our body. And so the more we live into that reality, the more we'll flourish.
And Stan, there's a third implication for ministry that you mentioned. Could you unpack that for us?
Sure. Yeah, that relates to what we do in our professional lives. So how you see the people you serve in your work, or that your work engages, will determine how you engage them. So, for instance, in medicine, let's say you're a physician and you're a physicalist. You'll walk into the room and be tempted just to look at the chart, because that's all there is. It's just what the MRI showed that's going on here, because that's all this patient is a body. So your engagement with the person will be the engagement with the chart. You might not even look at the patient, and then you'll just prescribe the protocol that should be followed, and you're out the door. Now, if you're a dualist, especially a holistic dualist, you're going to look at the chart, because the chart matters. That's data that's true and that needs to be understood, but it's not all the data. You're also going to ask the patient how she feels, what she's experiencing inside, things about the nature of her soul, essentially. Even though you might not be framing it in those terms, you're going to ask her for her first person perspective of, are you feeling better? And even though the chart might say something differently, I need to hear from you. So it's going to, in a deep way, affect how you engage the patient and how you diagnose what's going on and how you prescribe a treatment protocol. One example. Or in business, if somebody's, an employee's just a cog in the machine, you'll treat them in one way. But if they're a person who not only has the need for physical well-being, namely a paycheck to buy the things they need, but they've also got a spiritual life, they've got an emotional life, they've got these other things going on in their souls, well, you're going to treat them a little differently as your employees or your clients or whatever it is. So that's just the tip of the iceberg, but those are some ideas.
Well, we have lots of people listening in vocational ministry, so why don't you unpack that for us?
Well, great. That's getting back to the issue of neuroscience and neurotheology. If we are just ultimately a body, a physical thing, as neurotheologians are implying, at least, if not explicitly stating in some of their writings, then increasingly the training for pastors and missionaries and others in vocational ministry will be helping to learn neuroscience more and more, because you are shaping the brain, not the soul. If, on the other hand, you take the Cartesian dualist view in ministry, you're going to focus on the liberation of the people you're serving from this physical realm. So yeah, you've got to go to work and make some money, but that's really just valuable because it helps you put food on the table and give some money to missions. Really, where the spiritual action is, you'll tell them, is either serving here at church or sharing your faith with your colleagues or going on a mission trip, because that's where the most important thing is, because it's the soul, the immaterial, the spiritual realm that is good, and the material physical realm, whether it's the body or the culture around us, is all bad. And so you just want to kind of get yourself out of that. I was involved in a student ministry during my college days, and I had our director say, hey, study as little as possible so you can just stay here, don't fail, stay in school, so you can spend all your time on the important stuff, which is evangelism and discipleship. Well, that carries through into professional lives of a lot, where I've just got to go to work and kind of do this. And the really important stuff I'm doing is what I do with my church or in my mission work. So, if you've got a Cartesian dualist view, which draws heavily on Plato's distinction of spirit is good, matter is bad, then that's going to be your focus in ministry. If you have this holistic dualist view, you're going to understand all of reality as sacred, in the sense of God is present everywhere. And so, yes, my worship on Sunday is important, but my work 9 to 5 has intrinsic value also. All week in my work, and the people we're serving, right, our parishioners or those in our ministries, can be encouraged in their work to see it as intrinsically valuable, and not just instrumentally valuable as, okay, here's a way to make some money to do the really important things. So it makes a difference in how we help people do what we think God's called them to do. It also helps us pastorally as we counsel people, just like the physician. We're able to say, yeah, this seems to be a problem of soul that you've come to me to talk about. your anxiety, but how are you eating? Because that might affect it. What you're doing in your body, it might have some implication for the state of your soul. And so it gives us the ability to, in a more robust way, help people flourish, help people live the life God's given them to live. So just a few examples.
Yeah, I think it's really great just to like land that in the practical, and as you're just sharing those examples, it really does help, kind of just become more aware of how this is playing
Yeah,
out in the way that we think, in the way that we live, the way that we interact, and the way that we minister as well.
right.
So, looking forward, as you've just released your book, Have We Lost Our Minds? What do you hope will be the lasting impact of your work and how the church understands human nature and approaches spiritual formation?
One of the things that Dallas Willard said just about on his deathbed, he was near his passing. He knew that. He called JP to his bedside and they had a last visit. And JP shares about this in his eulogy at Dallas's memorial service. It's online. You can find it easily, I think. But Dallas said, one of my two great fears is that the spiritual formation movement will not be ground in increasingly sophisticated philosophical and theological underpinnings. In other words, we'll get off track because we won't understand better and better what the human person is. And in other writings, it's clear he meant either we'll go a physicalist route or we'll kind of go a hyper spiritual route, this Cartesian route, or even more of a kind of a pantheistic route it could go into. That's my hope, is that this book in some small way contributes to the vision of Dallas Willard and others to help us as a people, as a body, as the people of Christ, to develop a more and more robust theology and philosophy of the human person and therefore of human flourishing.
So, you mentioned your book quite a lot. How can people find out more about it and connect with you online?
So yeah, the title is Have We Lost Our Minds? Neuroscience, Neurotheology, the Soul, and Human Flourishing. And it's on Amazon. It's also on my website, stanwallace.org, with a little video trailer of why I think it's important, some of the things I've shared here, a place to download the introduction and first chapter to get a feel for it, I think. And then I've also got an author's page on Facebook, Stan Wallace D-Man, where there's some interaction going on some of these issues. So yeah, I'd love to have listeners check those out.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I'm going to make sure to put that in the show notes for those who are driving or are busy doing things. So you can go back and you can find those links there. Stan, as we wrap this up, any final words of encouragement or insight that you'd like to share with our listeners?
God has revealed truth about these matters. We sometimes think, boy, we can't understand or really have knowledge of what we are. And I'd want to encourage listeners to know, we can know these things. Based on that knowledge, we can live well, we can flourish, and we can help others live well. We can minister well to others. And yes, it might take some work to wrestle through some of these issues, but most things worth knowing take a little bit of work. Nobody's going to become, as Dallas Willard elsewhere says, we don't think anything of it for somebody to spend years and years studying dentistry or surgery before they start actually engaging in their work. And in the same way, yeah, we need to be serious about doing anthropology, studying what we can know about what we are so we can be better and better at living well and helping others live well.
So good, Stan. Thank you. With those final words, we're going to say goodbye to you. Thank you for your time. It's
Thank you.
definitely a different type of topic that we've had on the podcast, but nonetheless, it is highly important for us to dive into these topics and actually begin to ask, what does it mean to be human and how does it affect the way that we live? So thank you for sharing your insights. It's been extremely valuable.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks so much to have me on the show.